GTX 260, the start of serious gaming GPUs. In 2008, NVIDIA released the GTX 260, and this was the moment PC gaming graphics cards stopped pretending. Before this, graphics processing units, so GPUs, existed, but the GTX 260 felt unapologetically built for gamers who wanted high resolutions, smooth frame rates, and modern games without compromise. At the time, it delivered exactly that, even in demanding titles that pushed previous hardware to its limits. Owning one meant you were ahead of most players. This wasn't a casual upgrade. It was a statement. You didn't buy this card to get by, you bought it to dominate. Of course, it came with consequences. The card was large, loud, hot, and hungry for power. Your PC case needed airflow, patience, and forgiveness. By today's standards, it's painfully slow, but historically it mattered because it redefined expectations. The GTX 260 established NVIDIA's new philosophy: performance first, efficiency later. It taught gamers to accept heat and power draw as the cost of real performance. That mindset became the DNA of GTX, and once it took hold, there was no going back. And that decision shaped everything that followed. GTX 460, the people's GPU. A few years later, NVIDIA released the GTX 460, and this is where GTX stopped being exclusive. This card wasn't about dominance, it was about accessibility. Affordable, powerful for its price, and incredibly popular, the GTX 460 gave mainstream gamers a reason to care and a reason to upgrade. It handled popular titles well, scaled nicely with overclocking, and made budget builds genuinely exciting. For many players, this was the first GPU that felt like a smart purchase instead of a compromise. Yes, it ran hot and wasn't exactly quiet, but for the performance it delivered, most gamers didn't hesitate or complain. Here's the important part. The GTX 460 proved that mid-range GPUs didn't have to be disappointing. They could be good, even impressive. And once gamers realized that, expectations permanently changed across the entire market. GTX 580, the undisputed king. Then NVIDIA reminded everyone who was in charge. The GTX 580 launched as the fastest single GPU graphics card available. No debate, no real competition. This was the benchmark card of its era, the one every other GPU was measured against. Games were tested on it. Reviews revolved around it. Enthusiasts wanted it. It fixed many issues from earlier generations and delivered elite performance with impressive stability under heavy loads. This was NVIDIA at full confidence. But subtlety was not part of the package. It consumed serious power, produced serious heat, and came with a serious price tag. This wasn't for casual players. It was for gamers who wanted the best and were willing to build their entire system around it, including cooling and power delivery. For years, the GTX 580 represented what high-end actually meant. GTX 750 Ti. When efficiency took over, in 2014, NVIDIA did something unexpected. Instead of chasing more power, they chased efficiency. The GTX 750 Ti didn't even require an external power connector, which shocked everyone and immediately changed upgrade paths. You could drop it into almost any PC and instantly turn a basic system into a capable gaming machine. It ran cool, quiet, and consumed very little power while still delivering solid performance in esports titles and older games. That made it incredibly versatile. It wasn't built for ultra settings or demanding AAA titles. And that was the point. The GTX 750 Ti proved that performance per watt mattered. From here on, NVIDIA's priorities shifted. GPUs were no longer just about brute force. That change would quietly redefine everything. GTX 970. Amazing performance, unexpected drama. The GTX 970 quickly became one of NVIDIA's most popular cards. Excellent 1080p gaming, strong 1440p performance, low noise, good thermals, and an attractive price made it an easy recommendation for years. Then came the graphics and memory controversy. Technically, it had 4 gigabytes of memory, but not all of it behaved the same way. The internet reacted exactly how you'd expect, with complaints far louder than the real-world impact. Did it break games? No. Did it ruin the card? Also no. Millions of gamers continued using it happily, but the conversation changed. The GTX 970 didn't just shape gaming setups, it reshaped how people viewed hardware transparency, trust, and marketing claims. From this point on, trust mattered more. GTX 980 Ti, Titan power without the Titan price. If the GTX 970 was about balance, the GTX 980 Ti was about power. This card delivered near-flagship performance and came dangerously close to NVIDIA's far more expensive Titan lineup without the Titan price tag. It crushed 1440p gaming, handled early 4K better than expected, and quickly became a favorite among enthusiasts who wanted maximum performance without total insanity. Yes, it was expensive, but compared to what it replaced, it felt justified. The GTX 980 Ti aged gracefully and stayed relevant far longer than most GPUs. It proved NVIDIA could deliver extreme performance without forcing buyers into absurd pricing, something that wouldn't always remain true. GTX 1060, the GPU everyone owned. In 2016, NVIDIA released the GTX 1060, and this card didn't just succeed, it dominated. For years, it was the most popular graphics card among PC gamers, and its longevity speaks for itself. The reason was simple: excellent 1080p gaming, low power consumption, cool operation, quiet performance, and a price that made sense. No ray tracing, no AI features, just reliability and consistency. For an entire generation, the GTX 1060 was PC gaming. Even today, many of these cards are still running, still playable, and still proving how well NVIDIA nailed the formula. GTX 1080 Ti, the legendary finale. And then came the GTX 1080 Ti, the card NVIDIA probably wishes didn't age this well. At launch, it delivered insane performance, dominating 1080p and 1440p while making 4K genuinely viable for enthusiasts. Years later, it still competes with much newer GPUs. No extra features, just raw power. It was expensive, but it earned its reputation through longevity and consistency. The GTX 1080 Ti didn't just end the GTX era, it ended it on a high note that made everything after it harder to justify. Why GTX still matters? GTX cards defined modern PC gaming. They pushed performance forward, made powerful GPUs accessible, and created some of the most iconic hardware ever released. But they also represent a philosophy NVIDIA slowly moved away from: raw power, simple design, no feature checklists. GTX also trained an entire generation to understand settings, bottlenecks, and upgrades, creating more informed players who optimized systems intelligently, stretched hardware lifespans, and valued gains over hype-driven leaps promised by marketing-heavy launches from manufacturers chasing margins instead of gamers. And once you really understand GTX, you start asking uncomfortable questions about newer graphics card pricing, about feature-driven upgrades, and about whether performance was replaced instead of improved. Because the moment you connect those dots, everything after GTX starts to look very different.